The Massachusetts Bay Colony began in 1629, when Puritans, fearing imminent persecution, got a charter from King Charles I to form the Massachusetts Bay Company. Soon, thousands of migrants came to the colony in a wave known as the Great Migration, and so began the Massachusetts Bay Colony.
The Massachusetts Bay settlers were not unseparatist Puritans. They wanted to reform the Church of England from within. They thought that it was corrupt and too much of its expenses were spent on lavish decor, when it should have been focusing more on prayer. The Puritans believed in predestination. They looked for signs to find out what their fates would be. When a stroke of luck came, they took this as a sign from God that they would be accepted into heaven. Having a stroke of luck did not guarantee that the Puritan would be admitted to the group of visible saints. The case had to be presented in front of a council which would then decide. On the other hand, the damned were distinguished from the visible saints and did not share the same privileges. Only the visible saints were eligible for church membership. In Puritan ideology, God had determined before one's birth whether one would be allowed into heaven or would go to hell. Puritans recorded their everyday lives and interpreted the events as signs from God. Luck and happiness prompted the Puritans to believe they were visible saints, while accidents and grievances could be considered signs of damnation, and the Puritans understood them as omens of going to hell. When a Puritan thought that he should be a visible saint, his case would be reviewed by the elect. A Puritan had a greater chance of becoming a member of the elect if he had family in church. In the Massachusetts Bay Colony, church and state were separated so that politics could not corrupt religion and vice versa. The minister acted as governor, while the colony was an oligarchy, governed by a small group of the elect who constituted about 1/5 of the population. More than 90% of the colonial families owned farms. In the Massachusetts Bay Colony, families mostly grew corn, rye, peas, squash, and pumpkins. In later years of the colony, turkeys began being raised domestically. Horses were used for transportation during the summer and winter months. A good horse could cost £20 half a year's salary for a laboring man. Landless farm laborers earned a measly £30 a year. 40% of the population were farmers who owned land and lived in considerable comfort. In the families, men hunted, while women made clothes, candles, and soap, and cooked.
Children were closely supervised and held under strict rules. They were held to high standards of respect. They were expected to be silent around adults, speaking only when spoken to. Puritan communities were extremely strict and closely guarded. Volunteer patrols were hired to check if people were at church. Guidelines of conduct were established. Many of these rules were intended to keep people in line and keep them safe against the numerous dangers of the outside world, such as Indian attacks. Although the Puritans led virtuous, hard-working lives, they certainly had more fun than we give them credit for. Colonists enjoyed rich music, mostly written by European composers. Sonatas, minuets, and folk tunes were among the most popular forms of music. Violins were the most popular instruments. Harpsichords, English guitars, and harps became popular later in the period.